Gentlemen, you are both drunk on cosmic wine.
Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Mark Sylvester.
And I'm Dr. Richard Schulman. This is Alt Psych.
Wait, say that again. You're the old hippie, what?
I'm the old hippie. Let's go. Time for healing. Let's go. Bring it on.
All right, let it begin now. We are here. We are live on tape. What the hell are we talking about today, Rich?
Well, times are rough, and they're rough for everybody. So we decided we would go off into the sort of psychedelic netherworld and talk about the collective unconscious. And
I love it.
Yeah, me too. Because I think we ought to bring interesting things to people. There's enough gloom and doom out there. We're all stocked up on that. And I think we've forgotten there's so many fascinating things. And so, when Mark said, let's talk about the collective unconscious, I said, thank God, something that isn't about, trauma and COVID and all that nasty
Well,
stuff.
don't get excited because we're going to talk about trauma and COVID. But I think for some people, they've heard, maybe they've never even heard the term collective unconscious, but, it was, I guess the term was coined by Carl Jung originally that, around the same time as Freud, right? We're talking about the idea, the concept as if we're all connected to each other.
I think it was actually more than that you could connect with any thought any human being had ever thought.
Yeah.
Pretty
yeah,
cool
it'd be interesting we could go down the rabbit hole on how he arrived to that, I guess, analytic theory. But I'll tell you throughout my own career how much the concept has become to resonate more and more, and especially on the theme of doom and gloom. I think it's been most illustrated in what's going on in the world today.
I knew we'd get back to that.
Yeah, so let's get back to doom and gloom. No, I saw a meme where it said, somewhere on some island, some poor fool without an iPhone isn't aware of how terrified he's supposed to be. But according to the collective unconscious, even he is not immune because
he's not immune, but he could, according to the collective unconscious, we can find answers to all these problems. I'll give you an example. You ever know who's on the phone before the phone rings? I mean, that's the collective unconscious. We're tapping into some pretty amazing stuff if we set our minds to it. I follow a lot of interesting speakers, and there's a woman named Gigi Young she's a psychic and sort of a futurist, and she says that we have to have a certain spiritual evolution in order to connect with this stuff, or maybe to connect with it consistently. And I think that that's accurate. People, Michael Jordan only hit 45% of his shots. We expect psychics to hit 100%. But I think that the idea is just that there's more information out there than we realize. And it isn't just dot to dot. We live in an age of scientific materialism. And what that says is if we can't measure it, it doesn't exist. Well, we're talking about things that we can't measure very easily anyway.
Well,
so let's define the collective unconscious.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, so my beef with the collective unconscious in doing research for the show was that Jung was talking about essentially a network, a fabric, an interwoven grid that connects all members, but of a similar species, which I thought was interesting. So basically, if we go down the idea and the concept that we're all connected, it's limited outside of the human race. So that makes me immediately think of like Native Americans and their connection to the animal world and reverence of the animal spirits and stuff like that. So I thought it was interesting that it was limiting it to a species, because if you look outside of the species, and then you can kind of understand how the Native Americans connected to the animal spirits of their animal realm, or let's say that there's intelligent life elsewhere in the universe, which is extremely high probability, but we also know it's so far away that we can never achieve it in our lifetime. This would be an instant way to connect with other consciousness or entities or beings or um, uh, thought, anything consciousness, sentient, thought related would be in that realm. So why do you think he limited it to the human species?
Well, I mean, a little bit of background first. We think of these guys like Freud and Jung as like these very scholarly, very stable individuals, and Jung was a wild man. I mean, a lot of these guys were really wild. Reich was a wild man. Freud, probably did more cocaine than would choke a small horse, as Robin Williams once said. Um, Jung, when he was a kid, his father was this very austere preacher and very strict, very austere. And Jung was doing seances with his sister in their bedroom. I mean, Jung was into astrology. In the end of his life, he was into UFOs. He was into a lot of stuff, including the Nazis for a while. But he disavowed that later. Anyway, he was a wild guy, and he would go into these places psychically where he would get this information. I think a lot of his theories came from meditation, observation, then meditating on what it meant, and he'd get these flashes of insight. Why he limited to humans? Well, look at the milieu he grew up in. He grew up in Europe, very austere Protestant family. Native American culture was real different from where he grew up. So I mean, the idea is brilliant, but it's in the context of where he was. Now, the Buddhists have a concept not so different from this, because Buddhists don't feel like we're separate egos, that we're all connected. So maybe studied some Buddhism too. I don't really know that.
Well, really, Hindu mysticism is the closest thing in my tireless research this week and preparing for this. And that's the Akashic records. I mean, the Akashic records refer to the frequency grid that programs and creates our reality. And it's a little bit of a philosophical term. But that's exactly what the collective unconscious is and was. I mean, they called it the somniferous ether. This idea that there's this fabric, this ether that connects any and all. Again, if it's limited to the species, like the collective unconscious and Jung says, I tend to disagree with that. I think if you're gonna, why stop there? If you're gonna be able to connect with intent, emotion, thought, you could, in theory, be able to connect across any and all, not only species here on Earth or aliens, intelligent life in a different galaxy, but what you said at the beginning of the show, much like a tesseract, to all time and space.
Yes,
Because,
and I can't speak for all animals, but I know plenty of cases where people saw dogs or cats in a dog shelter and went, that's the one, and they could just feel it. I mean, my girlfriend's dog, for example, she saw a picture of him on the internet, drove 2.5 hours to rescue him. Just, and the dog is completely bonded to her. I mean, it's so the idea that maybe there was some kind of connection is not lost on me, and I'm certainly willing to entertain unconventional hypotheses for things, because there's a lot more to heaven and earth than's been explained by our science, as someone once said. I think it was Hamlet, perhaps. So when it boils down, well, what does collective unconscious have to do with where we are today, I guess would be the question. We're in kind of a unique time, 2020 now. A little bit of background. I don't know how much of this people have studied, but I've studied a guy named Rudolph Steiner, who was, I think he was a theosophist. I'm not sure what the nomenclature would be, but he was involved in the mystery schools about 100 years ago. And now what he said was exactly what's happening now. He said around the year 2016, for 30 years, we would be experiencing conditions that would be like a war, And we'd have to figure out if we're going to hold on to our humanity, or if the human race was going to destroy itself with technology. Now, he didn't say become a Luddite and not have technology, but that we needed to be the masters of the technology rather than the servants of it. And I don't think we've decided yet whether we're masters or servants. But that idea is part of kind of as a species, talk about species, what I believe we're going through right now is a huge initiation of how do you stay calm in this chaos?
Well, and an awakening, right? I mean, because it's painful, just like growth is painful. You know, when people wake up, you feel lousy, right? Until you get your blood going, until your eyes stop, adjust, and you're not blurry, and you get your joints moving. And I feel like we're in a time where we're just first coming, awake. Maybe we're in a hypnopompic state here. Which, fun fact, the concept of collective unconscious helps provide a mechanism or a theory about hypnagogy, hypnopompy, clairvoyance, like cellular memory. We've talked on the show before about storing trauma, emotional energy physically in the body, in the physical realm. All of that is really explained to some degree, or at least theorized, by the concept of the collective unconscious, which is why I thought this was such a fascinating thing to talk about, because it's a two-way street. Not only is every thought and action being recorded in an Akashic plane, or in an astral plane, or Akashic records, almost in like Saint Peter, going through the book of your life, but it can work the other way, and that we realize our thoughts create matter, they affect and influence outcomes. And therefore focusing on all of the hysteria, the hype, the fear, is projecting that and pushing that not only just out to all of our other humans on the planet, but the other species, and probably other dimensions, other aliens in a distant galaxy.
Well, I think about it like this. If you see, I have a photograph behind me. If you don't like that photograph, you don't have to look at it. You and I can have a very nice conversation. If I've got music on that you don't particularly like, as long as it's not too loud, we could still have a nice conversation. Now imagine that the dog pooped in the corner and I didn't clean it up and it stinks in here. Well, it's much harder to have a nice conversation. The fear that's in the air, it's not even air, that's in our collective energy field of this planet, makes it hard to have that nice conversation, as if it was the dog poop that didn't get cleaned up. I'm seeing things in my practice that I've never seen before. It's like everyone's emotional process has been amplified by this collective experience. You want to call it collective unconscious, I'm fine with that. But there's a collective experience certainly in our society, but I believe in the whole world. And we're seeing, like we talked about the other week, levels of depression, suicidality, anxiety, drug overdose. It's off the charts. But I think that's a reflection of this collective unconscious. People come in, they don't talk about COVID exactly, but they've been kind of in this odd place since March, between lockdowns and masks, and, you're afraid of the air, you're afraid of your neighbor, no hugs, that kind of stuff. And it's taking its toll collectively. People don't come in and tell me, well, I'm upset because I have to wear a mask. But their symptoms, their emotional symptoms are worse, much worse, by an order of magnitude. And like I said, I've never seen before, and I'm guessing you have a similar experience.
100%, and it's made me think a lot about this, and really want to talk about a launching point being the collective unconscious, because social psychology under mob mentality, conversion disorder, what was formerly mass hysteria, all of these things have always fascinated me throughout my education and understanding them, because what does it all mean, Basil? What connects them all together? This concept, I keep coming back to this concept of collective unconscious. And you and I were speaking the other day how it's fascinating and disturbing in one sense. If aliens did come to this planet, I think most people would agree that we would all put our differences aside and we would work together to combat this alien invasion force, Independence Day style. So why has that not happened with COVID? Because it's an invader, it's affecting everyone on the planet simultaneously in very similar ways. Why can't we, get Will Smith to lead the brigade and come together? And more importantly, why has it gone the other way, where we're afraid of our shadows and afraid of our neighbors? And
well, first of all, there's a lot more money to be made treating this thing or having a vaccine.
But that doesn't explain people's reaction there.
What's happening, the divisiveness is that people have different value systems. For some people, having the freedom to do what they think is right is more important than the potential security of doing what governmental leaders are saying, because and the divisiveness is divisiveness that's been around for quite some time. I mean,
well, would we have seen divisiveness if aliens came in and we knew that they were planning to take over the earth? Would we see the same divisiveness? Would people say, hey?
I don't think so. I know that there was a story, and I don't think it's apocryphal, about President Reagan talking to Premier Gorbachev when they were having the Star Wars negotiations, about weaponizing space. And he said, if there was an alien attack, would you help us? And apparently Gorbachev said yes. And in fact, if you go back to when Kennedy was president, before he was murdered, he was attempting to create a joint space program with the Soviets. And the idea was, if they had a UFO on their radar, they didn't want them to think this was one of ours. They'd start a nuclear war over it. Okay. I think that an outside invader, if we could prove that COVID was an alien life form, it might be easier for us. We're still debating, is it natural, is it man-made, and what's the best course of action? What's more important? Some people will tell you, oh my God, we've lost almost 200,000, or we've lost 200,000 Americans due to COVID. And another person say, well, we were supposed to lose 20 million, so we're doing great here. We don't need to have all these precautions. How could you think of not doing this? And we're so divisive in every way in this society. And the problem is not just the divisiveness. We could have two different visions for how this thing should be treated, or how the country should be run. And I can respect a different vision. But in our culture right now, if you don't agree with me, you're evil. It's not just we have a different opinion. Both sides think the other side is evil, at best ignorant, and I guess maybe they're both right. I don't know.
But my point is, if you extended that and our behavior as a society, let's just stick to Americans for a second. But if you extended that to an alien invasion, would we be standing around pointing fingers at each other saying, no, they're hostile, no, they're not, or you know what, do they really exist? How do I know you're not tricking me? Like all of the craziness that humanity is arguing, I just fail to see that behavior played out if it were an external alien invasion. Well, there were some notable differences.
Let's assume that it was an external alien invasion. Number one, there'd be big ships in the sky that you could see, would be my guess.
So the macroscopic.
Or things would be blowing up somewhere.
Right.
Okay, and you could see that. This thing, I mean, many people don't know anyone who's even been sick with this. Or, I mean, some people don't know anyone who's tested positive for COVID. I have a whole thing about the test being not that accurate, but that's a whole different topic. Most people don't know anyone who's died from this. Most people don't know anyone who's been really sick from it either. So for an invasion, you think about a pandemic, there should be people dropping in the streets. We're not seeing any of this. All the homeless people should be dead by now, and they're not.
But from the beginning, you're going based on what we've learned. From the beginning, when, hey, aliens have invaded, there we really haven't changed. I mean, when we stress, we regress, we've gotten worse. But that general first attitude and response didn't happen the way an alien invasion would. I brought up before 9/11 because I think 9/11 is a fair example of the dent that that day made on the collective unconscious. And the immediate palpable response that day was aliens have invaded. We are going to retaliate.
Well, and
we're going to come together.
Yeah,
we're going to come together.
We certainly rallied around the flag, but it seemed like there was a specific enemy. Now, you could debate about all that. 20 minutes after the planes hit the building, bin Laden was announced as the perp, even though he didn't take credit for it. So who knows how we knew that. The bottom line is, I think that there's a segment of the public that is responding to a long series of, at best, misinformation, at worst, lies. And my generation, you're a little younger, maybe a lot younger. I mean, I lived through whole lot, yes. I'm pretty young in here, though. Carl Jung.
I'm pretty old.
Or maybe Neil Young. The whole generation went through the murder of the president, the murder of Martin Luther King, the murder of Robert Kennedy, the whole Vietnam debacle, how we got in there. The divisiveness around Vietnam is very similar to what we're experiencing now. I mean, people really hating each other, calling each other names. So, fistfights breaking out.
Intolerance, yeah.
Tremendous intolerance to a differing opinion. So this has been going on for a while. Then you add to it, the idea of the Iran-Contra stuff, the CIA bringing drugs into the country, sort of at a certain point you go, well, what's the truth here? You got to decide what to believe. Now, we've gotten so good at faking things. I mean, like Abe Lincoln once said, don't trust everything you read on the internet.
Abe Lincoln said that?
Sure. Well, I read it on the internet, so I'm sure he did. The idea here is that we don't know what the truth is exactly. And I don't know if you've ever seen a TV show called Lie to Me. It's about a psychologist that is an expert on body language. And I studied the guy that was based on. His name is Paul Ekman, and he's an anthropologist, actually. Apparently also good buddies with the Dalai Lama, which blows my mind. But anyway, there's cross-cultural stuff that he found when he was in New Guinea that you find in New York City. When people have certain facial expressions, it means something emotionally, cross-culturally. Could that be part of this? Jung talked about archetypes as part of human development. Someone in that tribe in New Guinea is going to have a similar archetype to someone in Florida. I remember I was in graduate school, and my ex and I had completely different schedules, and she was early to bed, early to rise, and I'm up all night writing papers. And it's about 3 a.m. I had just gotten off to sleep. I hear the TV on. I come out, she's watching something. I said, "What are you doing up?" She says, "I'm watching the marriage of Prince Charles and Lady Di." I was half asleep, and I was in one of those things. I looked at him, and out of my eyes like this, and I went, "Oh, that's too bad. He's going to dump her." She goes, "You heartless bastard. How could you say that?" I said, "Well, she's digging him and he ain't digging her." I was watching their body language. Okay. And I said, "What are you so interested in this anyway? We're not British." And she said, don't you understand? It's every girl's dream that Prince Charming is going to come and take her off into the sunset and live happily ever after. And I realized maybe 1 billion people were watching this, and we were watching an archetype in real time. People were so interested in this thing, which to me, it wasn't particularly interesting, but a lot of people were interested. There's cross-cultural things, and if we're talking about collective unconscious, these are all manifestations of it, in my opinion. Stuff that affects everybody. Why were people interested? Okay, people were interested in Apollo 11, first landing on the moon. By Apollo 12, nobody really cared that much. Apollo 13 goes up and they blow up and their lives are hanging by a thread. Now everybody's interested again. Why? This idea of the hero, conquering against great odds, stirs people up. It stirs their imagination. That doesn't come out of nowhere. Why do we, the hero is the wise old man. These things are all over cross-culturally. So, and the idea of a collective unconscious is not lost on myself, who does deep work with people. And sometimes I've encountered a part of them where they're looking at something that seems to be the Akashic record, and you get to choose what vibrational level you want to live at. Do you want to live in a high vibration of love and a low vibration of fear? And can you change that vibration? Well, I mean, we don't even have to go into anything kind of, mumbo jumbo. If you live in love, you live better.
So is that where we're headed? If we think about the collective and this era, let's just say being an awakening, or, we're clearing the crust out of our eyes right now and trying to put our feet on the floor, and it'll take some time. If we live consciously that our thoughts primarily, because our thoughts determine our emotions and our actions as well. I mean, they're all intertwined. But if we have a mindset of working together, thinking to the future, evolving our understanding of our purpose of being, are we going to change the emotions of people throughout the globe in a positive way? In other words, can it work in two directions?
Absolutely, 100%. But
Let's
our
get on it.
programming, well, that's why we're having this podcast, isn't it?
All right.
Because we want to send out some positivity, that there are other ways of looking at things. We're being challenged right now. It's as if we're all in a giant initiation. Are we going to become spiritual masters? Are we going to be calm in this chaos? The truth of the matter is that at some point we're going to have to go more deeply inside of our psyches, inside of our spirituality. Silly example, try to figure out if somebody's lying now when they're so good at it. Mm-hmm. We're going to have to be able to pick up more subtle things, maybe energetic things, to get a sense of who are the people that we want to follow, who's giving us information that's filled with the heart rather than just in the head, and may have a more ulterior motive. We may not be able to tell that. People have gotten really slick and know how to manipulate through media. That's number one. Number two, in the current climate, I think you were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, we don't connect psychologically. Even if we don't have a physical connection, which I think is incredibly important. We're touch-starved and touch-phobic at this point. We don't connect psychologically. I mean, you've done telemedicine for a long time. You've figured out how to do this. Where you have to, it's sort of like when you touch, when you're in physical proximity, you get a bolt of, I don't even know how to, oxytocin, did I pronounce it right? I don't know.
Yeah, oxytocin.
Oxytocin. You get a bolt of that. Well, we're online here. We've got to put extra into it to get that same physiological reaction that makes us feel good. When you get hugged, You know,
I'm always floating on a sea of oxytocin, so I really don't know what you're talking about.
well, that's good news.
See?
Well, laughter is good medicine. I think I just got some oxytocin there.
Yeah, that was a sea of caca. It wasn't really a sea of oxytocin. So,
Well,
what are we
well,
going
but
to
you know,
do?
I think one of the most important things in this conversation is people will say, "Well, what the hell are you talking about? Collective unconscious?" But there are a lot of manifestations of it, and I think if we're going to move society into a more pleasant place, how about that? A more loving place. We've got to understand what you said, that our very thoughts, our very interactions become the place where the change happens. I'll give you an example. In India, if you're a beggar, you're probably going to be a saint. Here, you're just another homeless person. We do our spiritual work in relationships. So the idea that you want to make those relationships golden is kind of important. But it's about, okay, so you have a relationship to your partner, maybe to your kids or to your parents, to your extended family, to your friends, to your community, to your city, to your state, to your country, to the world. Okay. If you look at this from the point of view of a collective unconscious, my relationship with you affects all of those things.
So that's the message of the whole show, and I mean I think that wraps it up and summarizes a final thought, which is, if you want to not feel lost, right? If you want to actually be a change, and maybe this is best summarized on the bumper sticker I saw recently. Be the change you want to see, but realize that your relationships, your actions, and your attitude and your thoughts are really going to be what evolves us through this time.
I would give you another piece on that, though. Very often, fish don't know it's water that they're swimming in. And we do not always understand the impact of our behavior on other people. That's why it's important to get some feedback when life isn't working that well. I especially when I get a angry teenager, and God knows how I deal with angry teenagers, I think, because I was one. Um, they'll tell me, the parents suck and the teachers suck and and that I suck and the cops who arrested them sucked. And, they give me a laundry list. And I say, well, what do all these people have in common? They look at me like I got three heads. I say, well, just you. Okay. So understanding the patterns that we run, where they come from, and having a corrective experience, for most people, telling them to cut it out doesn't work. You know, um, but doing something, experiencing life a little differently. And I know if I didn't have really amazing mentors in my life, and I don't know how many people have mentors anymore. If I'm any good at anything, it's because of those mentors who cared about my soul and made it clear that they were going to hassle the heck out of me until I took a look at this stuff. So there's an interactive component in being the change that you want to see, which is, I guess, why you and I have jobs.
Well, let's hope that we keep them. Um, I think this is a great show. It was a great topic. I look forward to talking more about it, in one way or another, because I think that's how we're going to get through the tough space that everybody's feeling. So remember that you've got to see the change in order to be the change, and then ultimately make the change. And we'll do that through the collective unconscious. But in the short time until then,
Be well.
yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
See you, brother. Bye,
Bye.
everybody out there.